Here we have Jordan B. Peterson and friends explaining why we can't see God.
I think if you could see God clearly, you wouldn't need faith, right? So it's a precursor in a lot of ways to freedom. If you could see God, it would be so undeniable. Like first you die, but then additionally...
First you die? Why would God kill you for seeing him? I mean, being that he's an all-powerful creator and creates all the rules, he could make it to where people don't die seeing him and then showing himself to everybody. That doesn't negate freedom. People could still choose to worship him or not. We would just know that the being exists.
Everything that he would say would have to be absolute, and that's a kind of authoritarianism. And so it's like the faith of the belief is...
That's a kind of authoritarianism. So he admits that the Christian God is a tyrant.
What allows the freedom to keep falling and drinking wine and picnicking and making golden calves. And every time he's out of sight, there's a fall, and then there's a movement back again.
So you're suggesting if there wasn't a veil, there'd be... everything would be so understandable to us that we could just follow it like automatons.
Right, then you're back to the Pharaoh in a way.
I mean, you wouldn't have to be automatons. You could still choose to follow the being or not. But they're acting like if you have evidence, you're going to become a robot.
I think it's important also to keep in mind here that the distinction between, even though they're very closely related, revelation and ritual. And you can have, we all know this in our lives, you can have an epiphany. Oh, I'm going to do this, or I feel I'm called to live this kind of life, but that's just one moment, right? And the question of mediation of how, the highest ends up in the lowest has to do with ritual. It has to do with the rhythms of life we adopt in relation to, or in order to orient ourselves in relation to those high things. To bring in Aristotle, who's been taking a bit of a hard time in this conversation. Aristotle, in the Ethics, he brilliantly says how the virtues are established by repetition, right? You become strong by lifting heavy things, right? You become courageous by facing difficulty, and if you want to live in relation to the highest, you need every day to break that down into you might say, the habits of holiness or the habits of orientation. You can't spend your days as I have been tempted to do, distracted on the internet or scrolling this or being busy from one thing to the next.
Distracted on the internet. A person who's making a video to put on the internet says he's not distracted by the internet. That's funny.
And then think, what happened to the highest? You've got to start very intentionally and build habits into your life, or you'll always be at the situation of, on again, off again. There's a revelation.
That's exactly right.
It's got to be daily.
And again, I think that you see that, again, we're about to see that in the narrative when you talk about the big question, which is, you guys just received 5 minutes ago a revelation on this mountain from Moses and God, and you're about to sin in the most egregious way possible within 5 minutes of seeing that. And the idea in Judaism has always been that the weakest form of faith is based on seeing miracles. And when you see a miracle, it's easy to rationalize that away. I mean, it's easy to think of any memory in your life and you say, can you recreate the feeling that you had at that moment in your life? And the answer is no. I mean, it's almost impossible to recreate a moment that happened when you fell in love with your wife for the first time. Can you recreate
It's interesting how he claims, or he believes, the weakest form of faith is miracles, when the Bible is based upon miracles being the evidence for Jesus being God and the Bible being true. So that's just kind of funny.
Right now, the feeling that you had just sitting here? And the answer is no, you can't do that on command, right? It feels a certain way in the moment, and then it doesn't feel that way 20 years later, how it was exactly in that moment. It feels something different. It's the rituals of everyday life that make you fall in love with your wife every single day and continue that love going. And the same thing is true of God. It's not the revelation on Sinai that makes you think, okay, well, this is what God is. It's the living with God every day with Him in your midst that allows true romance to actually bloom.
One of the
romance with God? So are people dating God? Is God now gay? If, men want to have a romance with God. So that's just a weird way to put it.
Things you do with people in psychotherapy as a behaviorist is you find those things they're afraid of or disgusted by and are avoiding, and then you help them implement a practice of voluntary confrontation, voluntary incremental confrontation. And the practice transforms them. It makes them into someone who's no longer intimidated and retreating in the face of either disgust or paralyzed.
So it sounds like he wants to do that to make people religious, because I guess he believes people have a disgust or an avoidance of God. So basically brainwashing people, pretty weird.
In the face of disgust or of fear. And it is that practice. And I think we've lost that in our modern culture. Like people say, well, I wish I was more courageous, or I wish I was more trusting, or they don't say this very often, but maybe they wish they were more humble, less prideful. And it's as if we think of that as that's something that's homogenous that could just descend on you en masse, instead of something that you practice. Like you practice trust with people. If you're wise, you practice courageous trust. And humility is a practice. You have to get better and better at it if you can. It's not like that's an easy thing to do, but you don't get better at it without practicing it in a ritualistic manner.
And that's what prayer is fundamentally asking what is highest to help you on that journey.
But if God has everything planned out, why would you need to ask them for help? Because at that moment, what you're going through is planned by God. So asking, God to change it is acting like you're God and you know better than God.
And that it involves fundamentally the humility to station yourself in relation to that which you need and asking it for its help day by his help, however you want to configure that.
Ours is a culture without prayer. Yeah. I remember as a student a lecture.
What's funny about prayer is it's just magic words. It's no different than, witches or Wiccans or pagans casting a spell. It's trying to cause some kind of effect on the natural world with, your thoughts and stuff.
Who was giving a lecture on the Stoics, and he said, the great difference between you and your ancestors, whether they were pagans or Christians, is they prayed. And he meant these rituals of prayer, prayers at meal times, prayers punctuating life. I mean, I think that is a very interesting observation about the modern world, and
and why it might have lost transcendence.
Yes.
Right, well,
Often
it's because it's not seeking for it, Oz.
Well, I think it's lost it because we got a secularized worldview. We live, as Peter Berger says, in a world without windows. So traditionally, the unseen was not unreal. But in the modern world, the unseen is unreal.
Well, if it's untestable, unproven, then yeah, it's not real. If we can prove that it exists, yeah, it's real, even though it's not able to be seen by, the human eye. We can use technology to view this stuff, like quantum particles. Why can we see quantum particles, but nowhere we can see the God that they believe?
Real world is politics, technology, and so on.
It's funny is people still believe in a secular manner that still has an implicit transcendence, that there's something they can communicate with that will guide them, because people often in trouble will, let's say, they'll hope they do the right thing. But you think about what that means, is that it means they know they're not doing the right thing at the moment, and then they're opening themselves up to the possibility that there is a right thing, and that there's a source of information that would reveal the right thing, and then it's easy.
No, saying I hope I do the right thing or I hope the right thing happens, it's not claiming that there's some kind of outside source that is going to give you information. That is just Jordan Peterson's religious belief.
for them to attribute the discovery of the right thing then to themselves. They thought it up. But they act as if they're talking with something, speaking with something that's transcendent, that has the capacity to determine what.
Just like most other like right-wing religious people, everybody has to be talking to a god, or is, or believe they are God, or is part of some kind of religion or whatever. That's the only way it makes sense to these kind of people. And honestly, I'm glad Jordan Peterson is not a clinical psychologist anymore.
Constitutes what's right. And so, and I was thinking too, Jonathan, here about the Jesus prayer. So maybe if you would just recite that for a second, that there's something I could say about it.
Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner.
Okay, so you say, well, why would people repeat that to themselves over and over? And I would say, well,
Why would people repeat that over and over? Because they've been told that they should say that, and convinced that they are sinners and need mercy from some fictional being to cure them of a fictional problem.
Won't know that it's a prayer that's repeated mentally, and sometimes monks will actually do it all the time, even in their sleep. And then there's a breathing which comes with that, breathing and a posture, and attending to the heartbeat, which creates this kind of rhythm that fills the person's life with this prayer.
Okay, so I think people don't pray in part because they don't know how or what it means. But this prayer, for example, as far as I can tell, means something like,
They don't know how to pray. I mean, anybody can pray. It's just talking to yourself and being like, hey, fictional being that I believe in, do you hear me? Hey, let's talk. Hey, can you do this? Blah, blah, blah. It's like, you don't need like special studies or anything like that in order to pray.
like the probability that I'm taking aim properly, optimally, and hitting the target constantly is very, very low. And to sin means to miss the mark. And so, knowing that, I want to keep in mind that that's the case, because
Like woke sin means whatever Christians want it to mean. It can mean watching football too much. It means not believing in God hard enough. It means whatever you want it to be.
the degree I keep in mind that that's the case is going to be precisely proportionate to the degree that I might open myself up to learn. So one thing you want to do, perhaps, is remind yourself constantly that one thing that could get in the way of your continued adaptation would be your unrecognized pride. And so that injunction there, that plea to admit to your sins, I don't see how that's any different than opening yourself up to the revelation of something that's transcendent, because you're only deeming yourself unworthy in relationship to at least an implicit ideal, because otherwise what are you unworthy in relationship to? And if there's nothing worthy beyond that that could correct you, then there's no consideration of what constitutes unworthy at all.
Funny, yeah, you're unworthy compared to a genocidal maniac character that has the behaviors of a angry child. Like the god that is supposed to be the most worthy commits genocide, endorses slavery, endorses infanticide, gets angry at a moment's notice and will kill you just for no reason. And it's like, how can this creature, this fictional being, be considered like the most moral? That shows the delusions of Christians.
And then you might also ask, well, if you're not unworthy, then why the hell are you suffering so stupidly?
I guess that's the end of the clip. I guess this is supposed to explain why we can't see God. Like, just another excuse for Christians to be like, why people can't see God, why we can't find evidence for God or prove God exists. And it'd be like saying, hey, I got an invisible pink unicorn in my closet, but if you see it, it will kill you, or it will take you'll have a lack of freedom because then you'll have to worship it or whatever. It is just But, religion isn't rational. You know what to do. Like, share, comment, and subscribe. Peace out.